Thank you for tuning into our podcast. We are coming to you from Holyoke, Mass. I am your host, Carrie, and I am here with our very own historian, Robert Conyo, who is the founder and also the personal tour guide of the historical tour of Greater Holyoke. He offers both public and private tours of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Massachusetts. You can check out his website for more information at holyokecanaltour.org. There he has videos, past and present photos, as well as his 2023 schedule. Today we'll be discussing the Calvary Cemetery in Chicopee. And now, why was the Calvary Cemetery in Chicopee started?
Okay, it was started in 1852. It might be the second Catholic cemetery in Western Massachusetts, but I know the first one was the St. Matthew's Cemetery in Springfield, Massachusetts. It was made in the year 1845, and it received all Catholic burials of Western Massachusetts, and maybe even some from northern Connecticut and southern Vermont. But the burials in St. Matthew were filling up that one and only Catholic cemetery in Western Massachusetts very, very, very quickly. And so it was owned, St. Matthew's was owned by a little bitty church, which was the first Catholic church in Western Massachusetts, called the St. Matthew's Church. Started in 1838, and what would become Chicopee was then Springfield. And that church would grow into what would be called the Holy Name Church of Chicopee. And that Holy Name Church came around 1857. But in those years from the first church to the brick and mortar church, you were having lots of deceased people all around Western Massachusetts because it served as the one and only cemetery for quite a few years. And by 1852, they were noticing this is not a big enough cemetery, this St. Matthew's Cemetery. So they started the Calvary Cemetery. It was paid for by this pastor of St. Matthew's Cemetery, and it would become a dual cemetery, St. Matthew's and Calvary together. What happened was that it stayed that way until Calvary became two things. It became not only the second one for the St. Matthew's and Holy Name Church, it also became a diocesan cemetery because the Catholic diocese had burials which didn't belong to any church parishioner. And what I mean by that, what if you were in an orphanage? What if you were in an old age home? What if you were in a hospital? You weren't necessarily belonging to a certain parish or church. Then the diocese needed their own separate cemetery. And the Calvary Cemetery became that. It was a dual-use cemetery, the only one in Western Massachusetts. The boys of Brightside Orphanage of Holyoke were buried there. The girls of the Mount St. Vincent Orphanage of Holyoke were buried there. The men and the women of the old age homes of Holyoke were buried there. The babies that died in the Mercy Hospital or in the Providence Hospital of Springfield and Holyoke were buried in Calvary Cemetery. But also parishioners from the Holy Name Church of Chicopee were buried there. And remember again, St. Matthew's Church turned into Holy Name Church. They were the same parish. So this is an incredible cemetery where you get extremely old burials, but most of those old burials have no gravestone. Remember, these are very, very poor people in 1852, and they could not afford that. What they would do, the family members would put a wooden cross in. It wouldn't last more than 10 to 20 years and rot away, and that was it. They could never afford a stone. So if you look at Calvary Cemetery, in certain sections, it looks vastly open, but it's all filled. And there's very few cemeteries with that big of an empty space. In St. Matthew's Cemetery, 100 yards away, is the same thing, but even worse. I've calculated there's 8,000 burials in St. Matthew's Cemetery, all of them between 1845 and 1920, and yet there's only 400 names engraved on the stones there. That means one person out of 20 has a name. 19 people out of 20 have no name on any stone in that cemetery. Calvary has a modern section, though, makes it look a bit filled in until you start poking your nose around and seeing really what's up.
Okay, now, why is there one burial in the woods in the back of the cemetery?
All right, according to Catholic law, when a person commits suicide, they cannot be buried on holy ground. And so what happened was most suicide victims would have to, the deceased of that person would have to go to the bishop of the Catholic diocese and ask them to be buried in a Catholic cemetery. The bishop could say yes or no. Most times they actually said yes. But in all cases, they would be buried outside the grounds of the cemetery, where the church still owned the deed to the land, but it was not used for burials. In the vast majority of cases, of course, there's a lot of suicides, in the vast majority of cases, no gravestone was ever put in place. And so you don't have a situation where there's a grave marker telling you where that suicide victim is. In Calvary Cemetery, if you go into the woods in the southwest corner, which if you face into the cemetery is the back right section, maybe 120 feet to the right of the administration buildings, you'll see two gravestones back there. One is for a suicide victim. The second one next to him on the right side is for his daughter. His daughter, when she was 6 years old, had gone back with the mother to Portugal with 5 of the other kids in the family. 2 kids in the family stayed behind with the father. The father had lost a job a few months before this move, and he had gotten hurt. His leg had been compound fractured, and he had let it heal for many months. And then he went back to Dwight Mills and he asked him, "Can I have a job back?" He said, "You're not healed yet, go away." So he went back a few more months, healed some more, went back. He still had a very exaggerated limp because of the severity of the fracture. And Dwight Mill told them, "No, don't ever come back. You cannot work here. You cannot do this job." Of course, there was no such thing as compensation back then. This is 1927. And so Faustino and Stanislaw went back home. Within a couple months of that event, he had gone into the basement of his house and committed suicide by hanging. His daughter, who lived in the house, didn't know where he had gone, and she went checking around into the basement, and she found him. So they had to get permission. They got permission to be buried in the very far back. It's the only apparent suicide victim burial in Catholic cemetery in Western Massachusetts that I've ever found. And I've probably visited about 30 Catholic cemeteries in Western Massachusetts. So one I could find. Thanks.
Now, tell us about the gorgeous cross.
Okay. The cross towards the front is a very beautiful cross. It's made by the same group that makes many of the crosses, the Prato group, and they're from Chicago. It's made out of copper and brass, and it honors all the parishioners of the St. Matthew's Church, the Holy Name Church, and all the deceased that are buried in the cemetery. In front and in the back are buried the nuns that served in the girls' school of the Holy Name Church. This is called St. Joseph's School for Girls. It lasted over 100 years, and there's several nuns, I believe about 15 nuns, are buried in this cemetery, right in front or back of this cross. So not only is it a gorgeous cross, it has many very important burials. So I tell people, if you want to get oriented to the cemetery, go there and then start to orientate yourself on what the cemetery has from that point.
Okay, now tell us about the 2 pastors that are buried here.
Okay, the fifth pastor, I believe, of the Holy Name Church is named John Conlon, and he was head pastor, for 48 years in the Holy Name Church. That must be a record for Western Massachusetts. It's incredible. And he really directed the Holy Name Church to be one of the best churches of all of the Pioneer Valley. It must be great to have direction from one person for that long, a very strong person, and make sure the schools are very strong and growing. There was a boys' school, a girls' school. There was also a special science building, a trade building built. There were renovations on all the buildings. The church was renovated, and you can see he did a lot in that 48 years. He didn't start anything, but he kept things going very, very strongly. Now, the other pastor is Frederick Bunville, and he was the head pastor of the Assumption Church of Chicopee, a French-Canadian church. Now, this Calvary Cemetery of Chicopee, remember, it's a cemetery for all. It's the main cemetery used by the Holy Name Church, but it also is the main cemetery used by the Assumption Church. And one is mostly Irish, the other one's mostly French-Canadian. But it didn't matter, it was also the diocesan cemetery, so it got heavy uses from lots of different people. And so in here you find Polish, Irish, Greek, and French-Canadians. And this Frederick Bunville, he kept his Assumption Church going very strongly. It started on Academy Street, moved upwards to Bunville Street, and then they had a fire there, and they moved it. I think it was in the 1950s. They moved it on to Springfield Street in Chicopee. So he served for about 36 years. It was a very stable force.
All right, so thank you for joining us, and you can find more information on the tours on his website at hoyokecanaltour.org. Again, where you can find out more information on his various tours, as well as some of his videos, past and present photos, and his upcoming 2023 tour schedule. You can also set up private tours with him as your personal tour guide. They make for a fun educational activity for the family or for a group parties. You can email him directly for that at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. Again, that's BOBCAT4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. So thank you for joining us, and check out some of our other podcasts.